So I'll split this into two podcasts, one on the genetic approaches, maybe two, maybe it'll just be finished in one. So there is the synthetic biology approach in general, that's broader context, and here the genetic approach to agricultural system, which includes livestock as well as the crops that we have been mentioning already. So let's start again with the schematic from this paper that appeared in Frontiers journal as a review of genetic approaches to food system. What are the climate change impacts on the food system? We kind of looked at it already a little bit, so I love schematics, so I'll show it again. Environmental outcomes of climate change, of course, include what we already looked at: sea level rise, flooding, salinization that I mentioned, extremes and erratic rainfall, increased storm intensities for some regions, increased CO2, of course, and increased temperatures, and desertification is happening, as well as droughts are increasing some places, which all together can feed back into increased disease severity, which we mentioned because of let's say reduced number of frost days or minimum nighttime temperatures, and lowering of the yields because you have crossed the optimal temperature and rainfall amounts. Even if rainfall increases, sometimes temperature may inhibit yields and so on. And salinization of groundwater and soil health degradation may also affect lower yields. Carbon loss is a very big problem from soils, but that's not just global warming. Even though global warming increases heterotrophic respiration from soils, humans have directly I have a lot of background noise from the apartment cleaning, but nonetheless we have carbon loss from direct agricultural activities, intensive agricultural activities, without the adaptation methods like tree-based farming or crop rotations, crop mixes, and so on. And lowering nutritive quality, which I mentioned, there is some evidence that increasing temperatures reduce the micronutrient uptake by the crop, so you may be getting less of iron, zinc, and other things that we need. So it's not just quantity, but the quality of food matters as well. Okay, so summary of gene. So this is about the gene editing. GMO, genetically modified organisms. Is it organisms? GMO crops have already been in circulation for a while. They have been part of the solution, as well as a lot of controversies, and whether they are as healthy as the natural ones, and whether the companies that produce genetic modifications lock in the farmers into a agreement that is not very beneficial to them, and so on and so forth. Nonetheless, here we will just worry about what are the various aims of genetic modifications or gene editing for in the agricultural sector. Okay, so summary of gene editing applications for abiotic stress. So we look at some species. This is a long table. Each table I show here is a piece of a longer table. I'm just using these to show some examples. Trait category, trait targeted, genes edited, which obviously I'm not going to get into, and the method used, which CRISPR shows up a lot here, and everybody knows CRISPR is a technique that has become discussed widely and is useful, and of course there are some controversies with those as well. And here are the references and the years in which they were published. So banana, abiotic stress, trait targeted, semi-dwarfed. Maize, abiotic stress is dealt with drought tolerance trait for genetic editing. Rice for drought tolerance as well. Rice is a very water intensive crop in the way it is done with flood irrigation for managing weeds, but now we have sustained rice intensification, which grows rice seedlings separately, then transplants them to the field after a few weeks, which greatly reduces the need for flooding and water use, and obviously that means drought resilience, drought tolerance as well. Rice is also aimed for genetic editing in terms of early flowering trait, for salt tolerance because of salinization of water bodies across from irrigation and sea level rise, and cattle for thermotolerance. There are other ideas that are not genetic, but that are aimed at reducing emissions from cattle by feeding them certain algae, seaweeds, and so on, which either reduces their methane emission from belching or other greenhouse gas emissions from their poop. So those are not genetic, but they amount to engineering through their diet and the genetic working of their digestive system. Okay. Some other example, summary of gene editing applications for disease tolerance. So this is biological traits now. So again, various crops going from banana, barley, and cacao. You can just see all of them are aiming for disease category, and traits targeted: banana streak virus, broad spectrum of diseases, resistance to phytophthora, which you have to read up for cocoa, cassava brown streak disease. I'll read these just because there is a variety of these that have presumably some relation to increasing temperatures, humidity, rain, etc. Okay, cotton, Verticillium dahile, whatever it is, and here are the publications and genes edited and methods again, which I'm not going to read. Cucumber, broad spectrum of viral resistance. Grape, powdery mildew. Grapefruit, citrus canker. Potato has potato virus and bacterial bite resistance for rice. So rice has many genetic editing happening for abiotic and biotic factors. We will see more in the next podcast, in the next slide, next table. Rice disease, rice leaf blast resistance, rice leaf blast. Powdery mildew on rice as well. Disease, broad spectrum of rice diseases. Rice tongue row sphere virus. Bacterial blight, and bacterial blight. So separate approaches, separate genes, and separate publications. So rice, which is a very popular grain consumed across the world by billions of people, especially in Asia and large parts of other parts of the world as well, is a big target for gene editing. Okay, summary of gene editing applications for land sparing. So how can we reduce the land use? When we talk about intensified yields or intensification of per hectare production, we are talking about reducing land use, but here we are talking about gene editing for reducing land use. So for maize, we worry about land sparing and increase the yield. Tomato, land sparing and yield. Ground cherry, land sparing and nutrition. So high nutritive crop modified for improved agronomic properties. Tomato, land sparing and nutrition, so yield and lycopene accumulation. Lycopene is good for health. I think it helps the prostate, if I'm not mistaken, so you can look up. So we are targeting yield as well as human health in this case. Rice, of course, land sparing for mostly yield, but different genes by different studies. Wheat for land sparing, so increasing yield per hectare. Blunt snout sea beam, so land sparing. Carp, catfish, cattle, chicken. So cattle and chicken get, cattle especially is the most inefficient calorie we can produce in terms of food items when you consider the environmental footprint in terms of water use, grain use, land use. So land sparing for cattle is of great interest, and here yield is of course meat per calorie, I suppose. Okay, so we talked about changing dietary habits of people, but you still have to worry about the fact that people may continue to eat cattle and fish for a long time, so you have to worry about how to reduce land use for those. The other gene editing applications are for nutrition. So again, we have various crops and vegetables and so on. So nutrition is the trait category in all of them, but they are looking at increased beta carotene in banana. Did you know banana had beta carotene, or are we introducing beta carotene into banana to increase nutrition? So you have to look it up. Brassica napus, increased oleic acid content, so again good for I think blood circulation and so on. You can look up. Camelina sativa, reductions in linoleic acid and linoleic. I don't know why it's written twice, but basically that's bad cholesterol, I suspect. Reduced starch, reduced phytate levels in wheat, in maize, reduced phytic acid, increased oleic acid content. Potato, reduced starch because that's a carb that you probably don't want. Increased amylose, prevented cadmium uptake in rice. Increased carotenoids in rice as well. So here we are not just talking about adaptation to climate change. We're talking about overall genetic engineering to change the nutrition and other traits. Land sparing is related to climate change, but if you do land sparing, then you also have to ensure nutrition, so maybe they're related to climate change but not so directly. Okay, so I will come back and look at this paper, which is on synthetic and systemic biology approaches to the larger applications, not just agriculture, but reducing greenhouse gas emissions overall from biological systems. So we'll do that in the next podcast. Okay, so the gene editing part is rather short, but it's a very vast literature. Obviously I'm not going to go into all of it here, but I wanted to put these podcasts as placeholders to give you enough introduction so that you can go and learn further details on your own with this as a starting point. Okay.